Alright, I just want to do a video that is pretty much summarizing, well, not summarizing so much as reading parts of the third chapter of the first division of the first part of Heidegger's Being in Time. He never wrote the second part, nor did he write the third division of the first part either. So I've gone through pretty well, pretty thoroughly, I think, gone through, the previous chapters, omitting a few things as necessary, but I want to go through this chapter, Worldhood in the World, the worldhood of the world, I should say. Essentially, what he's going on is he's talking about design and being in the world. Design essentially is being in the world, but in these first few parts, he's talking about certain parts of Interweltsein. This is the Macquarie translation. There's this one, and then there's the Jones Stambaugh translation, which are both great things. And I would read it in German, but I just am not competent enough in that language to read philosophy yet. I mean, it's just I'm not. I can probably carry on a good conversation with you if you are a German speaker. I can probably carry on a pretty good convo with you, but I don't think I'm good enough yet to read any kind of philosophy, especially existentialist and hermeneutic phenomenology, as this is. So, essentially, what I'm not going to go over the whole chapter. I'm basically going to be going over the first part of it, because there's parts that critique Descartes, and then there's parts that are very something that I don't really want to go over, because this is something that we all need to read. If you want to understand Heidegger, you have to read it, and read it with a sense of not that you're trying to understand every word, but more reading it in the sense that you're going to come back to it multiple times. That's how I first read most of it. I've read most of it except for there's a part of the second division that I haven't read actually yet. So I'd like to get into that. There is the whole first division where he goes through all the way through being as care, which is very interesting, I would say. So this is a primary good thing to understand in Heidegger's Being in Time. So I'm going to read some parts as well as discuss some parts as well. And what is being discussed here is categorical determinations. Are the world is the world is the totality of things at hand for Dasein. Being in the world, now we're talking about he's in these first few chapters, he's taking apart being in the world, not taking it apart, but analyzing certain parts. This worldhood of the world is looking at the in the world part, and pretty much going over Dasein's relation to the world through the world and worldhood. Being in the world shall first be made visible with regard to that items of its structure, which is the world itself. To accomplish this task seems easy and so trivial as to make up one keep taking for granted that it may be dispensed with. What can be meant by describing the world is a phenomenon. It means to let us see what shows itself in entities within the world. Here the first step is to enumerate the things that are in the world. Houses, trees, people, mountains, stars. We can depict the way in such entities look, and we can give an account of occurrences in them with with them. This, however, is obviously a pre-phenomenological business, which cannot be at all relevant phenomenologically. Such a description is always confined to entities. It is ontical. But what we are seeking is being, and we have formally defined phenomenon in the phenomenological sense, which is that which shows itself as being, and as a structure of being. Thus, to give a phenomenological description of the world will mean to exhibit the being of those entities which are present at hand within the world, and to fix it in concepts which are categorical. Now, the entities the entities within the world are things of nature, things invested with value. Their thinghood becomes a problem, and to the extent that the thinghood of things invested with value is based upon the thinghood of nature. A primary theme is the being of things of nature, nature as such. The characteristic of being which belongs to things of nature, i.e. substances, and upon which everything is founded, is substantiality, what is its ontological meaning. By asking this, we have given an unequivocal direction to our inquiry, and what is being discussed here is that being in the world is ontological and it has substantiality. And soon here he's gonna go over 4 kinds of phenomena, or the way in which the world and design are interconnected. Should we then first attach ourselves to those entities with which Dasein approximately, and for the most part, dwells? Things invested with value. Do not these really show us the world in which we live? Perhaps, in fact, they show us something like the world, more penetratingly. But these things are entities within the world. Neither ontical depiction of entities within the world, nor ontological interpretation of their being is such as to reach the phenomena of the world. In both these ways, access to objective being of the world has already been presupposed, and indeed in various ways. Okay. Now that's talking about the ontological distinction. Is world perhaps a characteristic of Dasein's being? And in that case, does every Dasein proximally have its world? Does not world thus become something subjective? How then can there be a common world in which, nevertheless, we are? And if we raise the question of the world, what world do we have in view? Neither the common world nor the subjective world, but the worldhood of the world as such. By what avenue do we meet this phenomenon? Worldhood is an ontological concept, and it stands for the structure of one of its constitutive items of being in the world. But we know being in the world as a way in which Dasein's character is defined existentially. Thus, worldhood itself is an existential. Well, I lost my place here. If we inquire ontologically about the world, we by no means abandon the analytic of Dasein as a field for thematic study. Ontologically, world is not a way of characterizing those entities which Dasein essentially is not. It is rather a characteristic of Dasein itself. This does not rule out the possibility that when we investigate the phenomena of world, we must do so by the avenue of entities within the world, and the being which they possess. So, what I want to talk about here is I want to discuss this little relation we have here. We have somewhat of a relation here between the Dasein and the self. There's a relation here, and what is going to be distinguished here is being is Vorhanden and being is Zuhanden. Vorhanden is beings present at hand, and then there's beings suhan, which are beings ready to hand. Like the very description in this book is the hammering, the hammer. We view the hammer in virtue of our use for it, or we view the hammer in its existence as to how we use it, as to hammer things. And then same thing with a pencil. You know, we're writing a pencil, and we view the pencil as it being ready to hand because of our possibility of use of it. And then we break the pencil, and we are no longer able to use it, and we're just staring at it. You know, then once that pencil breaking enough so that we can't use it, we're just sitting there staring at it, and that becomes a being present at hand because we can't use it. It's a being which is viewed in because of its presence, but not primarily as its way of its being used by us. The discussion the discussion of the word world and our frequent use of it have made it apparent that it is used in several ways. By unraveling these, we can get an indication of the different kinds of phenomena that are signified, and of the way in which they are interconnected. So we have four senses of world, and I'm gonna go over them here. World is used as an ontological concept and signifies the totality of those entities which can be present at hand within the world. Okay, so we're talking about world as ontic. World is used as an ontological concept and signifies the totality of those entities which can be present at hand within the world. And pretty much the world is the totality of things at hand. Number two, world functions as an ontological term, and signifies the being of those entities which we have just mentioned. And indeed, world can become a term for any realm which encompasses a multiplicity of entities. For instance, when one talks of world of a mathematician, world signifies the realm of possible objects of mathematics. So then we're talking about the ontological sense of world. 3, world can be understood in another ontological sense, not however as those entities which Dasein essentially is not, and which can be encountered within the world, but rather as that wherein a factical Dasein as such can be said to live. World has a pre-ontological existential signification. Here again, there are different possibilities. World may stand for the public, we world, or one's own closet domestic environment. So here we're talking about world as ontic, but the we world, the where we are. Looking at it ontically, but not in the sense of the totality of things present. 4, finally, the world designates the ontological existential concept of worldhood. Worldhood itself may have as its modes whatever structural holes any special worlds may have at the time, but it embraces in itself the a priori character of worldhood in general. We shall reserve the expression of world as a term for our third signification. If we should sometimes use it in the first of these senses, we shall mark this within single quotation marks. So this is then talking about what is meant by worldhood. Worldhood it's basically an ontological existential concept. And it's also pre-ontological. and then the derivative of the derivative form worldly will then apply terminologically to a kind of being which belongs to Dasein, never to a kind which belongs to entities present at hand in the world. We shall designate these latter entities as belonging to the world or within the world. Okay, now that's talking about Dasein and the worldly belonging, I guess. So I kind of want to discuss this in some detail, not a whole lot. Now, things that are discussed in this chapter is environment, environmentality, equipment, and equipmentality, and thus we get Zuhanden and Vorhanden. When it comes to the problem of analyzing the worldhood, ontologically, traditional ontology operates in a blind alley, if indeed it sees this problem at all. On the other hand, if we are to interpret the worldhood of Dasein and the possible ways in which Dasein is made worldly, we must show why the kind of being with which Dasein knows the world is such that it passes over the phenomenon of worldhood, both ontologically and ontologically. But at the same time, the very fact of this passing over suggests that we must take special precautions to get the right phenomenal point of departure, Ausgang, for access to phenomenon of worldhood, so that it will not get passed over. That world of everyday Dasein, which is closest to it, is the environment. World of everyday Dasein. What is closest around it is the environment, and then we can get notions like equipment and equipmentality out of this. We shall seek the worldhood of the environment by going through an ontological interpretation of those entities within the environment which we encountered as closest to us. The expression environment, Umwelt, contains in the environ, I don't know if you know the word German, it can be translated to at, but at is more the word by, B-E-I. Is more somewhat around. Contains the environ, a suggestion of spatiality, yet the around, herum, which is constituted for the environment, does not have a primarily spatial meaning. Instead, the spatial character which incontestably belongs to any environment can be clarified only in terms of the structure of worldhood. From this point of view, Dasein's spatiality, of which we have given an indication in section 12, becomes phenomenally visible. In ontology, however, an attempt has been made to start with spatiality and then to interpret the being of the world as res extensa. That's a Cartesian word. A. Analysis of environmentality and worldhood in general. Now then, in 15, the being of entities encountered in the environment. If we take as our clue our everyday being in the world, which we also call our dealings, I like that word, dealings. That is a concept that connects well to concern or care in the world and with entities within the world. Such dealings have already dispersed themselves into manifold ways of concern, care, concern, Zorga. The kind of dealing which is close to us is as we have shown, not a bare perceptual cognition, but rather that kind of concern which manipulates things and puts them to use. And this has its own knowledge. The phenomenological question applies in this first instance of the being of those entities which we encounter in such concern. To assure this kind of seeing, which is here required, we shall mark this within single quotation marks. So this is then talking about what is meant by worldhood. Worldhood it's basically an ontological existential concept. It's also pre-ontological. And then the derivative form worldly will then apply terminologically to a kind of being which belongs to Dasein, never to a kind which belongs to entities present at hand in the world. We shall designate these latter entities as belonging to the world or within the world. Okay, now that's talking about Dasein and the worldly belonging, I guess. So I kind of want to discuss this in some detail, not a whole lot. Now, things that are discussed in this chapter is environment, environmentality, equipment, and equipmentality, and thus we get Zuhanden and Vorhanden. When it comes to the problem of analyzing the worldhood, ontologically, traditional ontology operates in a blind alley, if indeed it sees this problem at all. On the other hand, if we are to interpret the worldhood of Dasein in the possible ways in which Dasein is made worldly, we must show why the kind of being with which Dasein knows the world is such that it passes over the phenomenon of worldhood, both ontologically and ontologically. But at the same time, the very fact of this passing over suggests that we must take special precautions to get the right phenomenal point of departure, Ausgang, for access to phenomenon of worldhood, so that it will not get passed over. That world of everyday Dasein, which is closest to it, is the environment. World of everyday Dasein. What is closest around it is the environment, and then we can get notions like equipment and equipmentality out of this. We shall seek the worldhood of the environment by going through an ontological interpretation of those entities within the environment which we encountered as closest to us. The expression environment, Umwelt, contains in the environ, I don't know if you know the word German, it can be translated to at, but at is more the word by, B-E-I. Is more somewhat around. Contains the environ, a suggestion of spatiality, yet the around, herum, which is constituted for the environment, does not have a primarily spatial meaning. Instead, the spatial character which incontestably belongs to any environment can be clarified only in terms of the structure of worldhood. From this point of view, Dasein's spatiality, of which we have given an indication in section 12, becomes phenomenally visible. In ontology, however, an attempt has been made to start with spatiality and then to interpret the being of the world as res extensa. That's a Cartesian word. A. Analysis of environmentality and worldhood in general. Now then, in 15, the being of entities encountered in the environment. If we take as our clue our everyday being in the world, which we also call our dealings, I like that word, dealings. That's a concept that connects well to concern or care in the world and with entities within the world. Such dealings have already dispersed themselves into manifold ways of concern, care, concern, zorga. The kind of dealing which is close to us as we have shown, not a bare perceptual cognition, but rather that kind of concern which manipulates things and puts them to use. And this has its own knowledge. The phenomenological question applies in this first instance of the being of those entities which we encounter in such concern. To assure this kind of seeing, which is here required, we must first make a remark about the method. Okay, I want to get to where he talks about Vorhanden and Zuhanden. Those entities which serve phenomenologically as our preliminary theme. In this case, which those are used, which are to be found in the course of production, become accessible when we put ourselves into the position of concerning ourselves with them in some such way. Not one into which we need to put ourselves first. This is the way in which everyday design always is. When I open the door, for instance, I use the latch. The achieving of phenomenological access to the entities which we encounter consists rather in thrusting aside our interpretative tendencies, which keep thrusting themselves upon us and running along with us, and which conceal not only the phenomenon of such concern, but even more these entities themselves as encountered of their own accord in our concern with them. So essentially what I want to discuss here, I want to discuss how I want to kind of look at, through reading Heidegger, this how being in the world and Dasein is a unity of being, essentially. A unity of being in that worldhood in the world is looked at in our dealings, our concern, our care, Sorge. Sorge is the German term for care and concern. And then that way from here, I will probably discuss the other chapters and talking about Befindlichkeit, Verstehen, fallenness, thrownness, all that stuff. And then also there's one other one I forgot. There's three modes that I plan on getting to in another video. We shall call these entities which we encounter in our concern equipment. In our dealings, which we come across equipment for writing, sewing, working, transportation, measurement. The kind of being which equipment possesses must be exhibited. Taken strictly, there is no such thing as unequipment. To the being of any equipment, there always belongs a totality of equipment, in which it can be this equipment that it is. Equipment is essentially something in order to etwas zu. Now this is very important in kind of understanding this kind of notion of equipment, dealings, and care. And this also relates to fallenness and facticity and thrownness. Thrownness and fallenness are kind of together a little bit. A totality of equipment is constituted in various ways of the in order to. The in order to is a relation of being, such as serviceability, conduciveness, usability, and manipulability. in order to as a structure, there lies an assignment or reference of something to something. Um, Now that's a relation between the design. I don't want to talk. I don't want to talk about design as a conscient sentient being, because that's a big can of worms that can be whooped out, I guess. I mean, design is not. It wasn't really. It was. He's talking about consciousness, but design is not meant to be looked at as the human existential subject. Not by any means. It's very, like I said, it's a can of worms. Whoops. Equipment can genuinely show itself in dealings cut to its own measure. The hammering with the hammer, for example. But in such dealings, an entity of this kind is not grasped thematically as an occurring thing, or in its equipment structure known as such, even in the using. The hammering does not simply have knowledge about the hammer's character as equipment, but it has appropriated this equipment in a way which could not possibly be more suitable. The hammering itself uncovers a specific manipulability, Handlichkeit, of the hammer, the kind of being which equipment possesses, in which it manifests itself in its own right. We call readiness to hand, Zuheinigkeit. That kite, man. The K-E-I-T makes the presence at hand, or readiness to hand. Vorhandigkeit, presence at hand, or readiness to hand. Zuheinigkeit. Okay. Now, the work to be produced as the towards which of such things as the hammer, the plane, the needle, likewise has the kind of being that belongs to equipment. This is very, very interesting. Now, I'm kind of really, going very skimming it. I'm skimming it. I have parts underlined here to be skimming. But it's very good if you are interested in this stuff, to read it for yourself. Lots of good comes from reading this, and also, especially if you read this one chapter, you get a good understanding of Heidegger's idea of the being of relation between Dasein and world, and thus worldhood itself. The relation of the in order to and such. Let's see here. In equipment that is used, nature is discovered along with it by that use, the nature which we find in natural products. Readiness to hand is the way in which entities, as they are in themselves, are defined ontological categorially. Now, ontological categorially, that's a part of that. Categorical determination, that's a lot of things. It's called categorially for a reason. Now, I could go very deep into the categorical relations, but that's I think, like I said, this is something that needs to be read. If then we start with the being of these entities, is there any avenue that will lead us to exhibiting the phenomena of the world? So then he goes on to how the worldly character of environment announces itself in entities within the world. Now that we have suggested, however, that the right to hand is thus encountered under modifications in which its presence to hand is revealed, how far does this clarify the phenomenon of the world? Lots and lots of questions here. The reason I don't want to go into it deep analysis is because of the fact that it's rich text, and if you are interested in this, you need to read it. I mean, it's so essentially, like, what I want to discuss here. Okay, here we go. The wherein of an act of understanding. Now, the relation of verstehen is another thing here that's interesting. The wherein of an act of understanding which assigns or refers itself is that for which one lets entities be encountered in the kind of being that belongs to its involvements, and this wherein is the phenomenon of the world, and the structure of that to which Worldhood assigns itself was what makes up the worldhood of the world, and the structure of that to which Dasein assigns itself is what makes up the worldhood of the world. Now let's go back to the fourth definition of world by Heidegger back here. Sorry, I'm going so long here. Finally, the world designates on the ontological existential concept of worldhood. Worldhood is itself may have as its modes whatever structural wholes any special worlds may have at the time. But it embraces in itself the a priori character of worldhood in general. We shall reserve the expression of world as a term for our third signification. So he uses the term world for the third one. If we should sometimes use it in the first of these senses, we shall mark this with a single quotation marks. So worldhood is an ontological existential concept, and has as its modes whatever structural wholes any special worlds may have at the time. Now that's a good thinking about worldhood, essentially. But I want to discuss here primarily the world is the totality of what Dasein has at hand. The world is the totality of things at hand, whether it's Vorhanden or Zuhanden. It's both of those. It's the totality of things at hand, and what is very interesting to me about this is being in the world. The relation becomes a relation of being because of our dealings, our concern, and how the equipment is discussed as the in or the to, and that's a relation to us. Now I've had lots of videos about how I think about how the relation between us and the world is not I'm here, that's there, but it's mostly one big unity of being, in that it's one thing primarily, it's one thing together, and that's actually pretty amazing, especially because it's called, Heidegger is called hermeneutic phenomenology in this book. I mean, he's called existentialist a lot also, but this is called hermeneutic phenomenology. It's called the this is phenomenology, but with reference to being as well. The unity of being and being in the world is not such that, like I said, it's not such that I'm here, that thing over there is there, and we're separate, but it's one unity of being. It's one thing. Being in the world is one unity of being, not such that I'm inside of not in the sense that I'm inside the world, in the sense that beer is in a glass, but more. It's so related because of experience, because of givenness. This whole thing is related into one big thing here. And that relation is strengthened by um, by the equipment, by the environment, and especially by the in order to relation. Um, Let me know what your thoughts are on this. If you want me to, if there's any part that you want me to kind of go in deeper into, I can do that. But I just wanted to make it as short as, I mean, it's been 35 minutes, so that's just mostly my reading is what it is, because it's very interesting to read any part of Heidegger, especially this chapter, Worldhood of the World. It's just amazing how he pretty much puts some of that, what do you call it, that caulking paste on this whole relation, I guess, and this analysis of in der Weltsein, or in this analysis of the in the world part, makes this whole thing just one meshing together perfectly, I think. So let me know what your thoughts are, and if you have any questions on this book, I'd be glad to just discuss it with you. So yeah, I have Twitter, and I have you can do YouTube comment or message.